The US and China are competing for Africa. African leaders love dealing with China, but they may want to think twice before continuing. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Real quick, some big news. After a lot of hard work, we have officially launched our new premium website over at ChinaUncensored.tv. YouTube and now Patreon have been messing with our show, so the only way we can keep making China Uncensored is with your support on the premium website. I'll still be uploading the same amount of videos as usual to YouTube because I want as many people to know about China and the CCP as possible. And if you'd like to join me in that fight, subscribe to the new website and I'll give you exclusive premium episodes you won't see anywhere else, website-only live streams, a way to chat directly with me and the team, and more. The link is below. With your help, we can keep China uncensored. Now on with the show. So, it's finally happening. In the 11th hour of his presidency, 2 years after US President Joe Biden vowed to visit Africa, he is finally fulfilling his promise as the US looks to counter China's deepening influence there. The trip will mark the first time a US president has visited sub-Saharan Africa since 2015, and the first time ever that a US president has visited the country of Angola. But when it comes to Africa, the US is definitely late to the party. Maybe Joe got lost on his recent trip in the Amazon. The Chinese Communist Party has gradually been taking over Africa through its so-called infrastructure investment plan, the Belt and Road Initiative. The US is going to have to play catch-up. But the good news is that the CCP has had plenty of time in Africa to show its true colors. Chinese state-run media would have you believe the China-Africa partnership has been an example for building a shared future. But the truth is a different matter. In actuality, China's involvement in Africa is riddled with corruption, such as this video, purportedly of a Chinese national giving a Zambian minister a large cash bribe. Then, of course, there's the shoddy infrastructure, like Kenya's railway to nowhere, and a crumbling metro in Ethiopia. Not to mention the poor treatment of African workers at Chinese hands. Beyond that, illegal Chinese fishing off East Africa is hurting local communities. Cheap Chinese crap dominates the African markets, and Chinese loans are pushing the world's poorest countries to the brink of collapse. Yes, China is bringing all sorts of peace and prosperity to its new empire. Just look at that peaceful prosperity. But just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, China began funding African terrorist groups. This is happening in a lot of different ways, but one of the major ways is through logging. Yes, logging. It turns out that one of Africa's most precious resources isn't minerals or diamonds, or even ivory. It's wood. As it turns out, the Chinese demand for rare rosewood, used to make high-end antique-style furniture, is empowering some of Africa's deadliest terrorist groups. Rosewood trade is banned in 16 African countries in a desperate attempt to save rosewood species from extinction. But as they say in China, "Please don't hurt me or my family, I'll do whatever you say." Oh, I meant the other thing they say. Rules are just suggestions. The rosewood must flow. Chinese companies are heavily involved in the rosewood trade, but they're not the only ones. Chinese officials are too. According to the Environmental Investigation Agency, in 2017, some 1.4 million illegal logs were allowed into China due to a grand corruption scheme that involved over $1 million paid by influential Chinese and Nigerian businessmen to senior Nigerian officials. And some of the transactions were facilitated by Chinese diplomats. That doesn't surprise me, considering that Chinese government officials have a history of working with criminal organizations. The CCP itself is basically the mafia. And guess what? Some of that wood came from areas controlled by the terrorist organization Boko Haram. Remember them? They're still alive and kicking hostages specifically. Are Chinese exporters supporting terrorism by buying wood from terrorist-controlled forests? No, of course not. According to a Chinese exporter with the pseudonym Mr. T, you can't say that, and it's beyond their concern. I pity the fool who turns a blind eye to terrorism. Meanwhile, according to the Institute for Security Studies, in West African forest regions controlled by the terrorist group Jinim, the militants began demanding access fees from Chinese traders, including lumber traders. But China's top rosewood supplier is Mozambique. Most of the wood there comes from the province of Cabo Delgado, a smuggler's paradise that's home to an arm of the Islamic State. Environmental Investigation Agency investigators were told that 30% of the timber logged in Cabo Delgado is at high risk of coming from insurgency-occupied forests. I've heard of cruelty-free makeup, but are we sure those blocks weren't made from cruelty-fueled wood? There's also a good chance that G20 leaders sat on chairs made of lumber that fueled terrorists, in this case African blackwood rather than rosewood. And China's not just giving money to these terrorists, it's giving weapons. Photos and videos of Jinim militants show them armed with weapons produced by Norinco, a Chinese state-owned defense contractor. That could be just a coincidence if rebel fighters in Mozambique weren't also equipped with Chinese AK variants, according to one arms research think tank. In addition, the Congolese group M23 also has Chinese weapons, particularly from Norinco and Xinjiang. Some, like the paramilitary Rapid Support Force in Sudan, even uses Chinese suicide drones. Okay, so 4 coincidences, although I'm pretty sure that's what's known as a pattern. Given that China has eclipsed Russia as the largest exporter of arms in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm not surprised that terrorists got their hands on Chinese weapons. Of course, a lot of these kinds of organizations get their weapons from their enemies, so this isn't proof that the Chinese government is directly arming terrorist groups. But it kind of doesn't matter. At least indirectly, China is funding and arming these groups, and that isn't good. And yes, I'm aware that the United States has some answering to do on that front as well. Thanks for the pullout, America. It's also a never-ending cycle. African militaries fighting terrorists and insurgent groups have one solution: buy even more Chinese weapons. They're cheap and come with very few strings attached. Potentially, literally, as they're so cheap, I wouldn't be surprised if they were held together with string. China has a long history of arming African factions, and China better hope it doesn't blow up in its face. Sorry, continue to blow up in its face. So hopefully, the US is successful in countering Chinese influence in Africa, as soon as Joe finds his way out of the Amazon. Episodes like this wouldn't be possible without your support. So instead of clicking to the next video, head over to our new premium website at ChinaUncensored.tv. There's a lot of great exclusive stuff you can only see on the website, and you'll be helping me continue to get the word about the CCP out there on YouTube. More info in the description below. So head over to ChinaUncensored.tv and become one of our first premium subscribers. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you on the other side.